Hi, I'm Joe Harroz, president of the University of Oklahoma. I want to welcome you to our Conversations with the President. This platform gives me the chance to talk to some of the great people who make OU so special. Make sure you're subscribed to Conversations with the President, and you'll be the first to know when new episodes are released. Let's get started. All right, first things first, welcome to the show. We are now well into the second half of the fall semester. Our students have gotten into their routines, found their place, we hope, for all of them in campus life. They've completed midterms, which is always a seminal moment in the projects they have. We just finished up celebrating homecoming, but we also know that right around the corner is the celebration of the holiday season and the timeless celebrations that come with that. One of the great things we got to do at our last episode was host fabulous and famous presidential historian Doris Kearns Goodwin. If you haven't watched it yet, that podcast is absolutely worth watching. Pulitzer Prize winner and just a remarkable individual. So if you get a chance to see that, this is a special week here. This is Free Speech Week, and it's our fourth year to officially celebrate it here at OU, but across the nation as well. We really feel as though there's a serious need to celebrate Free Speech Week. As you'll hear in this podcast, so much of it is not something that comes to mind during times of emotion and is most important during those times. So we have a remarkable individual here with us to bring this to our attention. His name is Greg Lukianoff, and he is the president and CEO of what used to be Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, and now is the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, broadening the mission. Been with FIRE for 23 years, 18 plus as the CEO. Must have been a very young president and CEO yep. At the time. Also an attorney and a New York Times best-selling author. There are a number of works that you may have heard of. If not, go find them and read them. The first is The Coddling of the American Mind, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure, along with Jonathan Haidt. And the second, Unlearning Liberty, Campus Censorship, and the End of the American Debate. And most recently, in the topic for our conversation today, the canceling of the American mind. Cancel culture undermines trust and threatens us all, but there is a solution with Ricky Schlott. And you've been in every publication, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, TV shows, radio programs, NPR, CBS Evening News, and NPR's Morning Edition. You most recently testified in front of the United States Senate and House about free speech issues on college campuses and artificial intelligence and its implications for free speech. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, that was a very long wind-up.
Yes, it was.
So I absolutely, as we discussed before the show started, I love the area of free speech. I know what you do is vitally important, not just from an academic side, but for the implications where free speech must flourish, which is on college campuses, along with the associated component of academic freedom. How did you get into this work, and how have you now been the CEO for 18 years?
Yeah, my dad is a Russian refugee who grew up in Yugoslavia and thinks of himself as Russian. My mother is ethnically Irish and grew up in Britain. And my fourth earliest memory was Christmas when I was 4. And I was taught by my mother that you had to be more polite even than the British, and I was taught by my father this exaggerated sense of Russianness, that you must always be honest. And on Christmas when I was 4, I got the first gift I didn't like, and my mom asked me what I think of it, and I think I have to be honest, I have to be polite, I have to be honest, I have to be polite, and of course I broke into tears, not knowing what to do.
The natural reaction.
And I remember my older sister, being like, "Oh, poor baby, doesn't like his gift," breaks into tears, and I remember wishing I had the vocabulary to explain. It's like, no, it's a societal paradox.
That's right. That would have probably been your exclamation. It's a societal paradox.
But it was amazing to think in retrospect that was my second earliest memory, because freedom of speech is all about how a lot of times it's a lot more important to be honest than it is to be polite. And growing up with among a lot of other immigrant kids whose families fled authoritarianism in South America or communism in Eastern Europe or Southeast Asia, I never took freedom of speech for granted. So I went to law school. I took every class that they offered on the First Amendment at Stanford. When I ran out of those classes, I did 6 credits on censorship during the Tudor dynasty, and I even interned at the ACLU of Northern California because this is what I wanted to do with my life.
Yeah, I love that. I think all of us I know when I was in law school, I wish I had that level of focus. Now,
people thought it was weird.
Right? And now they're jealous. That's what I tell myself. Yeah. So it seems like, and you deal with this every day, but it seems to me that if you ask 100 people, are you for freedom of speech?
Yep.
99 or 100 would say they're for it.
Yeah.
You don't come across that in your work. You see those that aren't living by those standards. Is that observation correct? And if so, to what do you attribute it?
Well, I just got back from London, and definitely one thing that I saw coming throughout my 23-year-long career was that it's very normal and understandable and even productive for people to disagree about what freedom of speech means, about like should that or this be protected. And that's one of the things that makes First Amendment law so exciting and interesting, is that it's filled with wisdom on how you actually have free speech in the world as it is, in the real world. But one thing I did see coming, and what we saw at FIRE, was an attack on the philosophy of freedom of speech itself. Where you get a little bit more of an eye roll when you mention freedom of speech, and that hasn't hit regular Americans here. But coming back from Europe, and they tend to be ahead of us on some of these negative trends. It really has become something that is associated. It's gotten kind of a bad association about it now. And I believe among a lot of intellectuals on campus, it really does have a bad association. And I've been trying to fight back against that my entire career.
And you see it actually potentially getting worse.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like right now in the intellectual sphere, they've kind of created an edifice that allows for excuses to not follow free speech under the First Amendment, to get around academic freedom, and more recently to sort of repackage freedom of speech as a binary that basically allows you to only defend the free speech that you like, but then the speech you don't like, well, that's reckless speech.
Yeah. So I've known about your organization for a very long time, but you might just tell those that are listening or watching, what does FIRE do?
FIRE is amazing. We're celebrating our 25th year this year, and we were founded by, and this is reflected in this is like our family lineage, and we still live up to this day. We were founded by a left-leaning libertarian, Harvey Silverglate, who's my mentor, and a more conservative-leaning libertarian, who's one of the world-class experts in the Enlightenment, particularly on the scholar Voltaire, who's more conservative-leaning. And they got together and they were concerned about the free speech situation on college campuses, even going back to the 1980s. And they wrote a book in 1998 called The Shadow University that Harvey thought, would blow the doors off of all this, what was then called political correctness, censorship, and that the whole thing, the book would solve the problem. And unfortunately, they instead, when the book came out, they got thousands of requests for help. So in 1999, they founded FIRE to actually just help with the requests for help that came out of that book. And then FIRE was founded, and of course, we solved the problem.
That's exactly right. Almost immediately.
Yeah, almost immediately. Unfortunately, no, it got a lot worse. And to FIRE's credit, we have saved thousands of students and professors over the years. We've defeated dozens and dozens of speech codes, probably hundreds of speech codes at this point. But it is true that during the time that I've been watching this, things have gotten worse on campus faster than even I saw coming.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, and it's not exclusively the province of the left or the right, is it?
Yeah. No. It's one of the things we point out all the time, and FIRE is genuinely nonpartisan. We take on censorship from the right and the left, and canceling the American mind. When we talk about cancel culture, we're not talking about a phenomenon just coming from the left. We're talking about something that also arises from the right, and we call that out and fight that there as well.
Yeah, it's this sort of values-based approach doesn't really have party affiliation, and the ability to trammel rights is not unique to an ideology.
Yeah, well, that's one of my friends actually from the ACLU used to say, you're not doing the Lord's work until I get hate mail.
Right. So last year's speaker was Nadine Strawson.
Oh, wonderful.
And
she's a FIRE senior fellow.
She is.
Which blows me away. Like, my lifelong hero is like an employee of my organization. And she points this out just to make me uncomfortable, and it does.
Yeah, well, I think you should give her a strong employee evaluation. She did a great job here last year. But it's that same idea of, one of my favorite definitions, not in the law school classroom, but just generally is free speech, means you have to listen to speech that you hate, right, that you find repugnant. Now, there is that line, though, where it crosses. And I know this is often the part of the debate where people will say, yes, I'm for the First Amendment, but. And how do you best articulate in a non-legal scholar way when free speech crosses from protected to unprotected?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I say is a lot of times people who are trying to sort of undermine First Amendment activists is talk about us as being free speech absolutists. And both Nadine and I point out that's not a real thing. Like,
right.
Those people don't exist. We all agree that there are exceptions to freedom of speech. But what I am an absolutist in is an opinion absolutist. And this isn't just because this isn't under the ridiculous idea that I believe that all opinions are equally valid. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of opinions are just plain wrong. But it's always important to know what people's actual opinions are, not even if it's troubling, sometimes especially if it's troubling, or else you just don't understand the world as it is. So the very heart, the one thing that defines freedom of speech, if you truly believe in it, is no viewpoint discrimination. What that means is that if you're in a place that generally allows freedom of speech, it's considered kind of the heart of darkness to say, you can talk about anything about this except you can't have that opinion. You're going to get in trouble for that. And so at that level of understanding, I think people start to get that there are hard questions here and there. But if we can agree on the idea that everyone, this old-fashioned idiom, everyone's entitled to their opinion, we're quite the ways there. Meanwhile, when I'm in Europe, I get a lot more, well, that's a really bad opinion. And I'm like, and you're safer? You think you're safer for not knowing that person holds that opinion? Yeah. And the answer is, of course, you're not.
And it's fascinating because, institutions, as you say, have to get this right to be truly successful. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to get wrong.
Yeah.
And it happens all the time.
All the time.
Which is one of the reasons that you exist as an organization. But
That's why business is booming, in fact.
Right, that's right. Business is booming. And I mean, it really is fascinating because it's always easy until the actual facts arrive.
Yeah.
And I've always found that whenever there's an issue, when things have calmed down, mm-hmm. the conversation's relatively easy.
Yeah.
Right? When you're held to the law.
Yeah.
Right? But in the moment, it's something that is very difficult, and it caves into human temptation and fears and emotions.
Yeah, that's true, and definitely I'm an old school ACLU guy, so I believe even like the Nazis at Skokie had free speech rights. But one of the more remarkable things about my career, particularly if you check out Unlearning Liberty, for example, my first book, is how often I'm defending nice people saying things that people wouldn't even bat an eye at off campus. Like how often the kind of stuff that can get you in trouble on a college campus aren't the close calls. I always pointed out this case where it was early in my career, a guy was reading a book called Notre Dame versus the Klan. It was about the defeat of the Klan when they marched on Notre Dame in the 1920s, because the Klan also hated Catholics. Mm-hmm. It celebrates the defeat of the Klan, but because the book had a picture of the rally when the Klan marched on Notre Dame, he was found guilty without so much as a hearing of racial harassment, because it made an employee uncomfortable. And of course, he could have explained, like, this is an anti-racist book. And I always point out when people are like, well, you wouldn't say the same thing about Mein Kampf. And it's kind of like, well, no, Mein Kampf is protected speech too. Just the fact it's an anti-racist book makes it more ironic that he got in trouble for it.
It speaks to the irony, not to the legality.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. And I mean, each of your works, I really do find fascinating. One of the terms that I really like in one of your earlier works is vindictive Protectiveness.
Yes.
Could you explain that term and why you coined it?
That was something that me and Haidt coined in me and Haidt coined in Coddling the American Mind, the original article, and basically it means the idea of arguing that I get to silence you because in the name of people, almost never yourself. These people over there, you can get all my vitriol, and that essentially like I'm justified in silencing you. And it's like a borrowed anger from someone that you're not. So it's justified as protectiveness, but there's a vindictive streak to it.
Yeah, almost a vindictiveness by proxy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and that's a sort of an attitude that we saw grow on campus, particularly since 2014.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, so much of this we see playing out, every semester in different ways.
Yeah.
One of the questions I always have is, and that I think through is what are the best tools you've found to teach generally young people or students here how to engage in civil discourse? How to engage in civil discourse over tough issues in a way that's constructive?
Yeah, I mean, there's even like AI-assisted software like Sway. There's ways to teach people to do this that I think are pretty smart and that are innovative. But the simplest thing that I think campuses need to do is they need to be teaching this on day one. And, if I could wave a magic wand, I would have every high school student in the country in their junior year do a debate on a serious topic, but have to take the opposite point from what they actually agree. Mm-hmm. So nothing really beats that, being made to actually take the opposite point from what you think, because we all do this in law school. And it definitely makes it impossible from that point on to think people who disagree with you are either stupid or evil. But there are lots of habits that people can learn and be taught. And I think more schools need a free speech orientation that teaches, this kind of counterintuitive ideas about radical open-mindedness and taking seriously the possibility, actually the certainty that you are wrong about any number of things, and becoming comfortable with doubt.
Yeah. One of my favorite things to do in large lectures especially, so I'll give an occasional lecture in each of the large American federal government classes, mm-hmm. is to ask the question as a law professor would, right, Socratically, which is, just by a show of hands, how many of you are infallible, right? And invariably somebody raises their hand.
Yeah,
like, no, you're not supposed to raise your hand right now. But, I mean, when you start from that premise that you are fallible, you're not perfect, the idea that you might hear competing ideas and you might learn something from that, suddenly you have to admit to.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's the thing. It's sort of like I think C.S. Lewis called it something like generational chauvinism, like essentially just believing that you're in the one moment when we have everything right is proved wrong over and over and over again.
Yeah. So, do you think it's too extreme to say that the work you do is necessary to stop evils like authoritarianism from taking over? And if not, why not?
I don't think that's too extreme. I mean, like that's one of the reasons why people whose families fled authoritarianism, totalitarianism, believe in this so much, because without freedom of speech, you're not really a free people.
And how does that? How would a civil society, to mm-hmm. use the vernacular, how would a democracy like the U.S. in compromising its freedom of speech? How would that accelerate a move or catalyze a move to totalitarianism?
Well, I think, and this is one of the graver points we make in Canceling the American Mind. We just give example after example of scholars getting in trouble for having the wrong opinion. And I'm going to talk about some today, and I might actually get in a little trouble in my talk because I'm going to point out opinions that students actually said should get you reported to the dean's office that actually ended up being that were actually verifiable, but nonetheless got scholars actually in trouble. Because like when you have a situation where scholars come to a finding that's unpopular on campus, but ends up being true, and the public sees that scholar get in trouble for having that opinion, even though it actually either is known at the time to be true or is later discovered to be true, they're not going to trust you ever again as an expert class. They're not going to trust academia ever again as an expert class. And here's what's so scary about this, is it means then we have good reason not to trust our universe of shared facts. And that is incredibly dangerous. So I think right now there's a lot of discussion of misinformation, disinformation. And to be clear, the country that my grandfather fled, Putin, is trying to do people disinformation. But I think one of the things that the expert class has been slow to accept is that some of that distrust is very much a self-inflicted wound. And when you actually have a situation where people feel like they can't trust people in authority to be objective and honest with them, that puts you in a very dangerous situation of sowing distrust that could end in bad places.
And it's especially important, I assume, in a university setting when you're at your most malleable.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, and that's ultimately what I'm also getting at is that's part of the function that university is supposed to play for the rest of the country. Really, honestly, American universities for the rest of the world. And that's one of the reasons why you have to be committed to freedom of speech, because these ideas, they have to be tested. You have to be able to engage in thought experimentation, devil's advocacy, counterfactuals. You have to be able to accept people disagreeing with you and to test your ideas, or else not only is no one going to trust you, they probably shouldn't.
And that's the reason that ideological orthodoxy, whether imposed politically or on a campus, is a massive negative.
Is it utterly corrosive? The world is hard to understand. Figuring out what is actually true from what is false is an arduous, never-ending process, and we short-circuit that process at our peril.
When is far too far on a college campus?
Yeah.
When do you say that speech is not protected and you should be punished for that speech?
I think the parameters of the law are pretty good, and I think that probably the one that's been frustrating the most to me is this argument so we saw the biggest number of deplatforming last year in history, and by deplatforming we mean when students or people, for that matter, off campus get together and demand that you disinvite a speaker, for example. But the uglier versions of deplatforming is when protesters show up and they shout down a speaker, or they make it impossible for people to get into the talk, or worst of all, they chase the speaker off using violence. And that's happened in the last several years, several times. Last year was the worst year. This year is probably going to beat it. And one thing that drives me nuts is hearing students who will show up and basically, shout down a speaker, which is them saying, because I don't like you, I get to decide for all of you that you can't listen, that you can't be heard. Now that's the definition of authoritarianism, but it's mob authoritarianism, which is kind of the oldest kind. And then they'll argue, we're just exercising our free speech. I'm like, no, you were being a mob censor. That is too far. And I've made the point that students, whenever they do this, they become the threat to freedom of speech on that campus, and they should definitely be punished if they shut down a speech. And if they engage in violence, they should be expelled.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how when you talk about it with a subject matter expert, it is straightforward, right? It's always the application that is tricky and so charged.
Well, that's why we get the whole organization together. It's actually been fun having the expansion of FIRE to being to expand via on campus, because we got all of my favorite people together in the leadership of FIRE, and we argue about individual news of the day, and believe me, we do not. I mean, we often disagree on it, and but it's also tremendously fun because we love this work and we want to get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. This idea of the debate, to me, I was a high school debater.
I'm shocked.
Right, and I love that because you had to take. Yeah, I was cross-ex. And was naturally a fast speaker, which did not inure to my benefit, except in the competitions. But it's fascinating because the ability to take an opposite side and have to argue it passionately does help you understand the other viewpoint in a way you otherwise wouldn't know. All right, I have like 9 more cards to go through of questions, and we have an absolutely finite amount of time. Every conversation today, will include a discussion about large language models, artificial intelligence, generative AI, components. And you just testified before Congress recently. Tell us a little bit about your testimony and the view that you tried to communicate.
Yeah, no, I was asked to testify, and it was a pretty partisan request. It was basically kind of like, tell us how the left's going to use AI, to censor people. And I was like, okay, I'll do the testimony, but I'm not going to testify to that.
Right.
I'm going to show up and talk about what I am the most worried about with regards to development of AI. And I live on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really clear to me one of the things that was happening in Washington, D.C. was that there were charities that were trying to scare people on Capitol Hill to death about the threat of AI in a pretty cynical hope that essentially the fear of what AI could be would create a regulatory environment that would favor some of the incumbent companies. And by the way, this is not a cynical idea like in this sense. It's like the most boring, obvious play in the book. It's called regulatory capture. And that's what I testified to, and basically making the point that, yes, there is peril represented in AI, but the idea of AI existing only in a handful of hands is what scares me much more. Because I think we've, to a degree, messed up the process of the discovery of truth in a lot of universities, in a lot of fields, if the topic in question has any political valence whatsoever. We have an opportunity to approach the search for knowledge with fresh eyes. But if that power is concentrated in too few hands, we're just going to replicate that same mistake, but this time in deciding what objective truth is for the operating system of the globe, possibly forever. Yeah. And that's what scares me more than the possibility of there being, some additional companies.
Well, now I'm scared. Right now, I
came
here feeling pretty good about my day, and now we're going to have the wrong set of truths.
So you're just scared about the right
Not
things.
Not just in the AI itself, but it populates itself across the globe, dictating our dystopian future.
Yeah, which one we get.
Yeah, you've been a really enjoyable guest so far. I love that. So, you're giving the keynote here in 35 minutes.
Isn't that crazy?
I know. And what is your hope? Like the one message you hope that the students, faculty, and staff that are there, that they hear from you?
Yeah, I hope that they. One of the things I am really focusing on today is, honestly, in some ways, how bad the situation has actually gotten on college campuses, so they understand how serious it is, but also that it doesn't have to be this way, and that there is a way that sounds scarier, but ultimately is more likely to result in a better world. Freedom of speech it's not going to guarantee you understand the world as it is. But without it, there's no hope that you're going to understand the world as it actually is.
Right. It's a necessary but not sufficient.
Exactly. And so hopefully they'll leave with a greater understanding of how serious this question is, and how sometimes, to bring it full circle, it's more important to be honest than polite.
Yeah. You've done this before, haven't you? I have one more question, but it's a perfect ending statement. We'll just edit it where that's the last thing you say, because it sounds wise and learned and sage in so many ways.
That was a complete mistake, by the way.
No, you landed it absolutely beautifully. It's like a dream ending. What is you've spent 18 years at the helm of this organization. Yep. I know firsthand you've made a difference.
Thank you.
I have seen the work you've engaged in. I've experienced it. I'm aware of it. You rank all of us, which has an impact.
Yep.
And your work's impactful.
Mm-hmm.
What gives you the most satisfaction and hope based on the work you've done and what you're seeing today?
Oh, there are two things that give me the most satisfaction. The team I get to work with at FIRE. They are people who are willing to make any sacrifice to make sure that we remain as principled as we've always been. Like the secret motto of FIRE is that I'm willing to drive this bus into a wall rather than be unprincipled. And we live by that.
Yeah.
And we just all, also love each other. The other thing that gives me, such satisfaction, and sometimes you really need this because, it can feel like you're just fighting all the time, is every so often running into someone who wouldn't have had a career but for our intervention, or would have been kicked out of school. And how we do this annual conference in Philadelphia every year, and at first I was really nervous about it because we have a bunch of teenagers and college students coming to Philly, and I was always just afraid of liability, and really more like someone getting hurt, and was wondering if it was worth it to bring all these kids here. And then I realized that it was so important for us to meet them as much as for them to meet us, because we needed to, in some cases, my legal director, my COO, like all of us, we needed to actually see those people who would look at you and be like, listen, no one else would have helped me but you guys. And that that reminds you like that there's a human cost to censorship, but there's also real people that you're fighting for every day in this work.
Well, I can tell you, as a former university general counsel and as a current university president, the work you do matters not just on the individual, but on the collective level. And it's great to put a face and a personality behind someone whose work I've admired.
Even this face?
Listen, when you're working with this, that's a joy. But thank you for being on here. Thanks for being our keynote speaker, and thanks for committing your professional work to something that matters and that's so foundational to the propagation of this democratic experiment. Yeah, it means a lot. And each of you, thank you. This could have gone on a lot longer. I promise you. We are artificially constrained, but actually constrained as well. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your time with us on this podcast. Thank you for joining. Cannot wait for our next production of Conversations with the President. Thank you.